Yeah, you're back.
So yeah, this happens sometimes with StreamYard.
Germany.
Germany, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
let's go to what's going on right now in Russia, in Kazan, Alex. Yesterday, when you look at the mainstream media, everybody was asking, why is Putin not isolated? And what would be your answer to that?
Well, I think that the only reason why they're asking themselves that question is because they believe their own narrative. They contrive this false narrative and then they convince themselves and then they believe it. And so now they're surprised that Putin is not isolated. Well, he never was. He never was. They just made that up themselves. And now they're all like, why do people not isolate Russia? Why do they shun the Putin as a pariah? I think it's born out of Western delusion, which is part of the narrative that's being shoved down everybody's throat 24/7 since at least 2004 that I paid attention. We've had wall-to-wall, nonstop, 24/7 negative coverage of Russia and Vladimir Putin. You can't even come across any story almost that looks at Russia and its leader and her leadership even in a balanced way, let alone in a positive way. But that's the international community consisting of United States, Canada, Australia, Western Europe, New Zealand, and Japan, maybe. The whole rest of the world sees a completely different picture. And they see that Russia is a constructive partner, that Russia doesn't do coercive diplomacy, that Russia doesn't hit countries with sanctions, that they don't go around dictating terms of trade and diplomacy and so forth. And that generally, when Russians make a commitment, they abide by their commitment over the long term, whereas the United States, they break every word, every treaty. And so everybody understands that making any kind of a deal with Western powers is futile, because as soon as it's disadvantageous to the Western power, they will simply tear it up and do something else. And they will do so on between themselves. Let's not forget the AUKUS deal, where the British and the Americans, behind the backs of the French, decided to jettison France's contract with Australia for the delivery of diesel-powered submarines, which was, I think, something like $30 billion worth. And they just, in bad faith, tore up France's contract and instead promised Australia that they would deliver American-built or British-built nuclear submarines. And the Australians said, like, oh, yeah, okay, fine, let's do that. And now it turns out that they're not going to honor that contract either. So Australia is not going to get any kind of submarine. So this is this is the empire of lies, when practically every deal is made in bad faith. Every commitment can be torn up before the ink dries on the paper. And everybody in the world that isn't brainwashed by Western mainstream media perfectly well understands this. They have rich history and experience with this. So, dealing with Russia, dealing with China, dealing with one another on an equitable basis is by now extremely attractive, rather than towing the Western lines and having to abide by their coercive terms.
To understand the BRICS right now, this summit, and one of the fundamental issues would be, how can we compare BRICS with G7? Is GDP a good item, a good element to compare these two, or GDP at PPP, purchasing power parity? How do you compare these two institutions?
Well, if you're going to go by GDP at all, I think you have to go by GDP purchasing power parity. Because I don't know, if you go to a restaurant in China, for a family of four, you're going to struggle to spend more than, I don't know, $50 or $100, right? Depending. But a family of four can eat for $20 or $30 and eat well. In Western nations, you're going to struggle to eat for less than 100 euros. The house pricing, cost of electricity and fuel, cost of construction, healthcare cost, and so on and so on and so on, are much lower in most of the BRIC countries than they are in most of the G7 countries. And what that means is basically that if you just look at the GDP, you're adding up all the invoices between people for the same activity that maybe in BRICS countries would be much less. So let's say if I buy a house in China, maybe I'll spend $100,000. Same quality, same size house, maybe in the United States, I'll have to spend $400,000 or $500,000. Again, we're talking about a purchase of a house. Somebody built a house and then somebody bought that house. So that's the economic activity. So to say that American economy is 5 times bigger because that same house costs 5 times as much is a distortion. It's completely meaningless. So if we go by GDP, we have to go by purchasing power parity. But we shouldn't be surprised if they don't go by the GDP at all, or they use GDP only as one of the measures. I watched a discussion between Pepe Escobar and Alexander Dugin from a few days ago. And I think it was very interesting because the way Alexander Dugin talks about economy is very, very different than any Western economist. And so he was saying that what is economy? Economy is extension of society. It's not just an economic consideration, it's a philosophical consideration, it's a spiritual conversation. And he's absolutely right, except that all those dimensions of the economy are completely ignored in the West. Because the economy, what is it? It's me going to the store, buying eggs and milk, and somebody producing those eggs and bringing them to the market, and somebody buying a house and building it, and somebody repairing his neighbor's car, and so on. This is economy. This is people making a living. Now, to make all that go, we need credit, right? So we get bank credit. And bank credit is allocated in some way, and it's allocated towards the uses that the society should deem desirable, right? In the West, I studied economics, and we are all simply brainwashed to think that there's this invisible hand and that capital simply gravitates towards those uses where it's going to get the best return. And that somehow magically this all creates this self-perfecting magical system that just generates prosperity, and we don't have to ever worry about asking ourselves, who are we? What do we want out of life? How do we want to organize our societies? What is it that we want? So I think that all those questions are political. All of those questions are philosophical and spiritual, because we have choices to maybe take all the wealth that we generate and just chill out and enjoy and do nothing. Maybe, go to the beach all day. Or maybe we want to build pyramids or cathedrals. Maybe we want to create beautiful things. Maybe we want to create safe neighborhoods and good school systems. And maybe we want to go to space and conquer space in some meaningful way. These are all questions that need to be asked. And then we have to ask ourselves, why should we do that? In the West, we have this belief that, no, you don't worry about any of that. And you just let, somebody else deal with it. And then you get an idiotic situation where, somebody decides that, a good way to allocate capital is to block out the sun, and so on and so forth.